Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 29, and today we are going to begin to cover the fifth and currently final film in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and that is Dead Men Tell No Tales, or if you're an international listener, Salazar's Revenge. So, Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales, aka Salazar's Revenge, had its world premiere at the Shanghai Disneyland Resort on May 11th, 2017. It opened to the general public on May 26th, 2017, and in the director's seat this time around were two directors, and these two directors were Joachim Ronning and Espen Sandberg. So plans for a fifth Pirates movie became known shortly after Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides released, and many directors were looked at before deciding on Joachim and Espen. And Terry Rossio even wrote a version of the script that was ultimately rejected. And this script has now been released online. It's become very infamous over the years. And this script entails a very different story than what we end up getting in this movie. And we will cover this script later on in the podcast. Maybe after we finish the film, maybe just a little later on, but we will be covering it soon. So instead, they hired Jeff Nathanson to write the screenplay, and after years of struggle, the movie was greenlit and began shooting in 2015. So the story they ended up going with was a story that has hints of the Curse of the Black Pearl's DNA, and the main plot has Henry Turner, who is played by Brenton Thwaites. He is trying to find the Trident of Poseidon to free his father, Will Turner, who Orlando Bloom came back to play in this movie. I'm so happy. He's back. My boy is back. So, of course, Johnny Depp also returned as Captain Jack Sparrow, along with Jeffrey Rush as Hector Barbossa, and Kevin McNally as Josh Gibbs. Other new characters in this movie included Kea Scodelario, who plays Karina Smith, an astronomer with some past that we will get to as we cover the movie, and the new villain, Captain Armando Salazar, who is played by Javier Bardem, who actually just happens to be the husband of Penelope Cruz, who played Angelica in On Stranger Tides, which I think is pretty funny. Stephen Graham also returns as Scrum in this movie, and we also see the return of some old fan favorite characters from the original trilogy. So Martin Kleba comes back as Marty, along with Angus Barnett and Giles New as Murtaugh and Mulroy, which is really awesome to see. Hans Zimmer, of course, did not return to compose the music for this movie, but Jeff Stanelli, who was a friend of Zimmer's, stepped in and did a pretty fantastic job on the score for this movie. I'll talk about it as we go through, but I really love the score of this film. So I'll say here, this is the most, let's say, unliked Pirates movie, but I personally enjoy it a lot, and I hope you can all join me, and let's all try to have some fun together. I know this movie has a lot of pain points that we'll cover, but I hope you can all join me through here as we begin our journey to find the Trident of Poseidon. So without further ado, let's get into Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. So the movie opens already with some great, fantastic music by Jeff Zanelli. We also have a really nice personalized Disney castle intro with the Pirates Jolly Roger flag on the castle, stormy clouds above. It's very dark and moody, which I think is a very nice opening intro for the film. And of course, I should also say, I did not mention, Jerry Bruckheimer, of course, came back and produced the film, because it wouldn't be a Pirates movie without Jerry Bruckheimer. So we're happy to have him back as well. But the movie opens with a very cool illustration of the god Poseidon holding the Trident of Poseidon, of course, because the movie is about Poseidon, about Trident Poseidon, so why not introduce us to Poseidon right away? But we see a bunch of other kind of drawings and pictures on this wall of different sea creatures like mermaids and krakens. Honestly, all these different like myths of the sea. If you look closely, there is actually a drawing of the Flying Dutchman on this wall, which kind of hints at who this is and whose room we're in right now. There's a lot of stuff on this wall. There's a Jolly Roger flag hanging there, and there's a board that says Father's Curse. So, of course, we immediately know that this is Henry Turner's room. So I'm going to state immediately right now, I'm so happy that Brenton Thwaites was cast as Henry Turner, because I cannot believe it, but Brenton Thwaites looks exactly like Orlando Bloom. I cannot explain it. It was a perfect casting, because it is so good. But we see on this board, it says Father's Curse, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, blah, blah, blah. But we see Henry grabbing some rope and grabbing all this other stuff. We also see a bunch of Jack Sparrow wanted posters on the wall as well. But we see Henry, he goes to grab this map that shows where he is. So let's take a quick look at this map and analyze it pretty quickly. So if you notice on the map, you can easily tell that one of the names on here sticks out very, very easily. And that is the word Port Royal is on this map, right dead in the center. So as we can tell, Henry Turner is living back on Jamaica with his mother, Elizabeth. So now we kind of know, we can kind of piece together what happened after the end of At World's End. So I know a lot of people are, dismayed that Elizabeth just went back to life on land and didn't kind of live out as a pirate for a few more years, or kind of go back to the sea after Henry was born. But, oh well, you can't really change anything about it, But on this map, we see Port Royal. We also see the lighthouse on this map as well, which is actually where Elizabeth is living, along with Henry. Both of them are living in this lighthouse that I'm guessing Elizabeth renovated. And honestly, talk about on brand, like the perfect place for Elizabeth to live while she's waiting for her husband, who is, cursed at sea for 10 years, or can only come on land once every 10 years. I think a lighthouse is literally the perfect... I don't know who came up with the idea for them to live in a lighthouse, but there's a whole bunch of different other places on this map that are kind of just made-up places. I wonder if Henry made up the names himself, or if they're actually real places in this area of Jamaica. But we do know that Elizabeth and Henry are living kind of close to Port Royal. They aren't living exactly there, but they're living kind of off to the west of Port Royal. So if you kind of take a look at the map, though, you can see where Port Royal is on this map, and you can see the kind of outstretching land on the left side of it. So thinking back to Curse of Black Pearl, we get that really nice wide shot of Port Royal at the beginning of the movie when, Elizabeth's chamber window opens and we see out. And we can see on the left side, there's kind of that outcropping of land, and that's the Wallalaboo Bay, or whatever it's called, that's actually on the Isle of St. Vincent, where they filmed the Port Royal stuff. So if they took that into consideration here, and we see that off to the left, I'm guessing that Port Royal should be off to the east of where this lighthouse that they're living in is. So not too far away. It works because, how would Elizabeth and Henry get food, water, all kinds of resources? They're close enough to Port Royal, they can go there and get stuff to live. Unless Elizabeth has her own farm, living off the land, like the queen she is. So who knows? But I am so happy that Elizabeth's back. I mean, not back, but she, the Turners, the presence of the Turner family is in this movie, and that makes me very, very happy. But anyway, enough of the map, enough of the landscaping and the geography of this movie. We see Henry, he goes and sneaks out of the window of his bedroom. So I'm guessing this is late at night. Elizabeth is probably asleep. And Henry goes and he escapes through the window. And we get a zoom-in shot on the candle, which ends up turning into the brazier at the top of the lighthouse. And then we get to see a really nice view of this lighthouse. A very old lighthouse that I'm guessing Elizabeth restored. I would love to see like a home renovation show, like a fixer-upper show of Elizabeth Swann moving in with her 1-year-old son and just like tearing stuff apart, doing demo and just like fixing up this lighthouse. Oh, that would be hilarious, I think. But anyway, Henry is rowing out in a boat here out to the sea. And we can see a shot where he looks back, and we can see he's pretty far out away from Jamaica and away from the lighthouse. So he's pretty far out into the open water at this point. But he pulls out his map again, and he kind of makes sure he's in the exact place, because he's going to attempt to do something that's very dangerous. You should not do this at home unless you have a father who is cursed to roam the depths of the sea and pick up dead people and bring them to the land of the dead. You should not attempt this unless that is your situation. But Henry, he ties a sack of rocks to his foot, and he throws the sack of rocks into the water, and that pulls him off the boat and under the waves. So this is a very dangerous thing to do. Obviously, he's hoping to God that Will comes and saves him, because if not, Henry will die. And as Henry sinks into the water, we see the silhouette of the Flying Dutchman coming, and he lands on the deck of the Flying Dutchman. And we get this really cool little scene of the Flying Dutchman surfacing through the water, and you can kind of hear the sounds of the water breaking as the Flying Dutchman surfaces up again. Once again, it's so nice to see the Flying Dutchman again. You don't know how good it was to see this Flying Dutchman again 10 years after At World's End. Like, I'm not joking, this movie came out 10 years and 1 day after At World's End came out. I don't know if that was precise planning, how it literally came out 10 years and 1 day after At World's End, but if that was actually the case, of someone had that idea and like, let's make that the release date because of it being 1 day after 10 years of At World's End. If you're not understanding why I keep emphasizing the 10 years and the 1 day, then maybe you should go back and rewatch Pirates of the Caribbean At World's End. But I think it's really cool how it came out actually 10 years later, and we had to wait. Just like Elizabeth, we had to wait 10 whole years to see Will Turner again and the Flying Dutchman again. So it's honestly kind of poetic in some kind of a way, but I don't know. I think it's really, really, really cool. But we get to see the name Flying Dutchman on the back of the ship, and it's so good to see the Flying Dutchman again. But Henry is alive, thankfully, on the deck of the Flying Dutchman. But he gets up and he hears footsteps behind him. And it is here where we get a quick look of Will Turner back off in the shadows. And Henry, asks, he's like, "Father?" And then we hear Orlando Bloom's beautiful voice again. Oh my God, I'm so happy. And Will just says, "Henry, what have you done?" And Henry's like, "I said I'd find you." And then we get the reveal of Will Turner. And he is Cursed Will Turner at this point. I feel like that's what they were calling him. Like, at least the Funko Pop of Will Turner that I have he was called Cursed Will Turner. Actually, no, it was called The Ghost of Will Turner for some reason. Never mind. But we get to see Will Turner again. And we can see that he's not been doing too good, it seems. So this is interesting, and it raises questions. It's also kind of the first inconsistency or kind of plot point error that we'll get to in this movie. This movie has a ton, but this is interesting to think about because, as you can see here, Will has barnacles on his face, and he has barnacles growing on his coat, and he has seaweed on his shoulder, and yeah, he has barnacles all along the left side of his face. So you may be wondering, well, why is Will, getting these barnacles on him if he's been doing his job? Isn't the whole point that if you don't do the job, that's how you end up getting cursed with the sea stuff. But it's interesting to think about. There's also, if you know about this is something that I feel like not many people know about. But on the special edition At World's End DVD from 2007, it was a 2-disc special edition. It's the one that I have. Inside there's this little pamphlet of a little Q&A with Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, and one of the questions asked about Will's curse and about the end credit scene where when he comes back after 10 years, can he go back on land? Is the curse broken? And Ted and Terry's response to that question was that yes, I mean if Will did his job and those 10 years were up, then his curse would be broken. Obviously, that's not the case here. Will is still serving the Flying Dutchman as its captain. The curse has not been broken. It has been the 10 years, so the end credit scene from At World's End has happened. And this, I'm guessing, is probably a year or two after that end credit scene, because Henry is still pretty young. I'd say that Henry was probably 9 in the end credit scene, so he's probably 10 or 11 here. So this is probably pretty soon after that end credit scene. So obviously, Will is still tied to the Dutchman. So it's interesting how Ted and Terry said that he would have been freed after the initial 10 years if he did his job. But it doesn't seem like that is actually the case. I'm guessing they just changed that to kind of have this arc for Henry in the movie. But anyway, let's press on. But Will is cursed. And maybe he isn't doing his job all the way. Maybe he is kind of taking some loopholes. Who knows? But there's barnacles on his face, and there's stuff on his clothes. Obviously, he's not like a sea creature or anything. So he's not like Davy Jones's crew. So maybe it's just because he's been underwater for 12 years maybe at this point that he's just gotten stuff on his face. But I think it's supposed to be more so the curse of the Flying Dutchman. I guess in this movie they make it seem like the longer you serve on the Flying Dutchman, the more sea creaturous stuff happens to you or something. But doesn't really make sense, but let's not worry about that too much. Anyway, back to the scene. So Will says, "Look at me, son." And Henry says, "I don't care." And then, so Will says to Henry, "There's no place for you on the Dutchman." And then he looks around and he hears the crew of the Flying Dutchman are beginning to stir and wondering what's happened, why they've surfaced, all this stuff. So Will's like, "They know you're here." And he says, "Get home to your mother." And Henry's like, "No." And then Will pulls out his sword and cuts the rope tying Henry's ankle to that bag of rocks. And he says, "Leave now, before it's too late." And Henry says, "I won't. I'll never stop. And if you throw me over, I'll come straight back." And then Will just says, "Can't you see I'm cursed to this ship?" And then Henry says, "That's why I'm here. I think I know a way to break your curse, to free you from the Dutchman." And Will's like, "Henry, no." And Henry's like, "I've read about a treasure that holds all the power of the sea. The trident of Poseidon can break your curse." And I'll say here, background to the scene, the music that's playing, they're bringing back the One Day theme, like the Will and Elizabeth theme from At World's End. And this scene never fails to make me emotional. I've cried at this scene sometimes. It's really good. One of my favorite scenes in this movie. This movie starts with a bang and ends with a bang. If you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. But this scene, it's so good. But Will walks over to Henry and he hugs him. And he just says, "Henry, the trident can never be found." And all Henry says in reply is he says, "I found you." And that's when the tears start flowing. And Will just says, "It's just a tale." And Henry's like the tales of you and Captain Jack Sparrow? He will help me find the trident. And then Will's like, "No, you stay away from Jack. Leave the seas forever. You have to stop acting like and Henry finishes for him like, "A pirate? I won't stop." I want you to come home. And we can see the Flying Dutchman is now beginning to sink back beneath the waves. And this is when we have one of my favorite moments in the entire Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. This next exchange from with Will and Henry mirrors a previous exchange between Will and Bootstrap Bill in Dead Man's Chest. And we'll get through the scene and then I'll explain the connection. And Will just says, "Henry, I'm sorry. My curse will never be broken. This is my fate." And he goes and he pulls off his necklace, the Will Turner necklace that we've seen in Dead Man's Chest and Outworld's End. He pulls it off. He says, "This is my fate. You must let me go." And he puts his necklace in Henry's hand. And this moment it's so good. And I'll talk about the parallel to this scene, which is in Dead Man's Chest. Of course, when Will is escaping the Flying Dutchman after he steals the key from Davy Jones, Bootstrap, who is cursed to the Flying Dutchman, he gives Will his knife. Bootstrap gives Will the knife that Will ends up carrying through the rest of Dead Man's Chest and Outworld's End. And he's probably carrying it now. But Bootstrap says to Will, "It was always in my blood to die at sea, but it was never a fate I had wanted for you." The words fate. Will says, "This is my fate. You must let me go." So it's a great parallel. And Henry, of course, not wanting to leave Will behind and wanting to save him, just like Will wanted to save his father. And Will says, "It's not a fate you had to choose for yourself either." And Will makes a promise to Bootstrap that he will kill Jones and he will set him free. And Henry is the same thing here. Henry promises Will that he's going to save him. He's going to find the trident and he's going to bring Will home. And this scene it breaks me. I love it so much. But Will, he puts his hand on Henry's face and he just says, "I love you, son." And of course, the music is just blaring right now as the Dutchman sinks back beneath the waves. And we can see this great shot of Henry rising to the surface as Will begins to... of course, Will is stuck on the deck, so there's this great shot of Henry swimming up to the surface, and we just see Will, he just slowly sinks off of the screen because he goes down with the Dutchman as the Dutchman goes back down under the waves, and Henry makes his way back up to the rowboat, which is somehow still there, and he just gets in the rowboat and he just says, "Captain Jack Sparrow." And then we go, boom, 9 years later, and we have some great music once again from Jeff Zanelli, but yeah, 9 years later now. So if that was, let's think about it here. The time frame, of course, makes no sense. So this movie takes place about a year, I think, after On Stranger Tides, because later in this movie, Barbossa says that the Black Pearl was trapped in the bottle by Blackbeard 5 winters ago. So that means that the raid on the Black Pearl happened a few years before On Stranger Tides, and this movie, I believe, takes place in 1751, and On Stranger Tides takes place, I believe, in 1750 is what everyone thinks. It could be around there, but this movie, I believe, is 1751. But 9 years later now, so if we think back to this, that scene that we just had was probably Henry, maybe that he was still 9 years old, because I'm thinking, because if he was 9 years old, right, that means he would have seen Will for the first time, end credit scene of At World's End. And then if we take 9 years after that, he would be 18, technically, if the ages are correct. So he would have only still seen Will just the one time he came ashore, and then when he put his life in harm's way to go and see Will at the bottom of the ocean there. But I'm thinking that Henry is probably around 20, maybe he's 21. Because let's see, if he's 20 or 21, he would have been 9, I believe, when he first saw Will at the end of At World's End. So 10 years after that, he would have been 19. And, I mean, it never, like, the thing that makes me question this is that we don't get the impression that Henry has seen Will since that scene that just took place. Maybe he has come ashore since then, but we don't really know for sure, which makes everything pretty hazy. But I would say that Henry's probably maybe 18 to 20 years old at this point in the movie. But of course, it's all up for speculation because as Pirates of the Caribbean fans know, time means literally nothing in these movies because there is not an established timeline, and if you try to place years on specific events, you will end up with inconsistencies through everything. But anyway, let's press on as we move into the future here. So we go 9 years later, and we see that there is a British ship that is chasing down a pirate galleon, and this British ship that is pursuing the pirates is the Monarch, is the name of the ship. So we see on the below decks of the Monarch, we see Henry is holding out this piece of glass, and he's kind of using it to look at the pirate ship that they're chasing down. And this is, of course, where we get introduced to Brenton Thwaites as Henry Turner. I think he was a perfect pick to play Henry Turner in this movie. Absolutely perfect pick. But we, of course, hear some soldiers shouting commands from the ship, and we hear this guy. His name is Maddox, and Maddox says, "Faster, you pathetic bilge rats! You'll pump the bilge and fill the scuppers. We're chasing down pirates." So you can see that Maddox is the guy who's kind of in charge of all the landsmen who are down here pumping the bilges of the ship. So one of the guys says, "Henry, get back here. You don't want to get kicked off another ship." So we can see that Henry's not the best deckhand on a ship, as we can tell. He's very aloof, and he's very invested in pirates, pirate lore, myths of the sea, as we'll come to find out. But Henry is, of course, still looking at this pirate ship. He says it's a Dutch bark, probably stolen off the pirate bonnet. So, of course, cool Steed Bonnet reference there for all my pirate fans. And also, I guess if you're a Our Flag Means Death fan, Steed Bonnet, of course, the real Steed Bonnet is way worse of a person than the person in the show, but that's a story for another time. But Henry notices that this ship is going into the Devil's Triangle. So Henry realizes this, and he's like, "My God." And he runs up to where Maddox is, and Maddox is like, "I warned you of leaving your post, boy." And Henry's like, "I need to speak with the captain." And Maddox is like, "What did you say?" And Henry's like, "Move," and he throws Maddox off of the staircase and runs up the stairs. Because, of course, all these people have no idea where they're sailing, but Henry is the only person who does. So the Devil's Triangle, as we'll come to find out a little further into the movie, the Devil's Triangle is, I guess, it's based off of the Bermuda Triangle, which is in real life. The Bermuda Triangle sits in the ocean. It's this triangle of land that, is potentially cursed. People say there's ghosts that lurk in there. There's all kinds of different stories about the Bermuda Triangle, how ships will sail in, and then they'll sail out, and there's like no one on the ship, or the ships will just never they'll never turn up again. So it's a really cool piece of like nautical myth and legend. So it's cool they tied it into this movie, and they renamed it the Devil's Triangle, I guess to make it more scary, but also because we have someone lurking in there, who we'll come to find out in a little bit. But we see the officers on deck that are observing this pirate ship going into the triangle, and Cole, who is one of the officers, he's the one who speaks here, he says, "She's going in, sir." And then we go over to the captain, who says, "Chase her down." And the Monarch continues to follow the pirate ship into the triangle. Henry, at this point, has made his way to the main deck, and he goes to run up to where the captain is. He's like, no, don't do it. And Officer Cole was like, you will not address the captain, boy. And then Henry's like, sir, look at your charts. I believe you're sailing us into the Devil's Triangle. And then the captain's like, you hear this, men? This landsman believes an old sailor's myth. And everyone starts laughing, of course. But Henry's like, sir, with all due respect, I have spent my life studying the myths of the sea. I know every legend and every curse. And I know ships that sail into the triangle don't necessarily sail out. But Maddox finally comes up and he's like, I'm sorry, sir. This one is clearly disturbed. But Henry looks up at the captain again. He's like, sir, trust in what I say. Change your course. And the captain's like, you dare to give me orders, boy. And Cole is like, arrest him. And Henry goes to run up to where the captain is. And Maddox yells out after him, like, Turner. But Henry runs up. He's like, I will not let you kill us all. And he tries to run up, I guess, to the helm. I don't know what he was really trying to do here. Like, he was so outnumbered. Like, I don't understand what's running through Henry's head. But two redcoats grab him. Henry starts knocking him out. He throws one off his back. Like, he's obviously probably learned some stuff from Elizabeth, I'm guessing, because who else would he have learned fighting from? But he gets hit with the brunt of a musket, and he gets surrounded by a bunch of soldiers. And the captain, Captain Toms, I should have mentioned, Captain Toms walks over to Henry, and he says, this is treason, and he rips Henry's sleeves. And if you are familiar with, like, nautical stuff, sailors and things like that, getting your sleeves ripped was, of course, an act of treason. And also, if you got your sleeves ripped, that was pretty much the end of your sailing career. So we could also tell that if we go back to Josh McGibbs, Josh McGibbs actually got his sleeves ripped. If you notice his outfit, he's still wearing like that Navy vest from Curse of Black Pearl when he was still in the Navy. So I'm guessing his sleeves got ripped, and he just ripped off the rest of the sleeves and just kept the vest. But Henry at this point has become disgraced. And, when this would happen, you would be disgraced from, like the military, from the Navy, all kinds of stuff. And you wouldn't be able to get back in that position because, your career was over, technically. So not looking good for Henry Turner. But Captain Tom says, lock him up, we're going in. And they bring Henry down to the brig as the Monarch begins to follow the pirate ship into the Devil's Triangle. So as they lead Henry to this jail cell, Maddox says, this was your last chance, Turner. And they throw him into the cell, and we see a bunch of Jack Sparrow wanted posters on the ground, coincidentally. And Maddox says, if it was up to me, I'd string you from the yardarm. On deck. And he gets those soldiers to follow him back up to the main deck. And then we see in the jail cell next to Henry, there's this old man who he picks up one of the Jack Sparrow wanted posters off of the floor of Henry's cell. And he says, Jack Sparrow. He's dead. Buried in an unmarked grave on the Isle of St. Martin. So that's interesting to hear as well, because that means that there's a myth that is that Jack is dead. So I wonder how this happened. Maybe it's just like a myth that just like a few people have. Maybe it's a widespread thing that Jack faked his own death potentially. There actually is a deleted scene that kind of covers this topic a little bit more, but we'll cover that when we get to the deleted scenes of this film. But the Monarch sails into the Devil's Triangle, and I just distinctly remember when the teaser trailer for this movie came out, and the teaser trailer was like just this scene. So it was just like the Monarch sailing in, and then the whole attack that happens, and then seeing Salazar and Henry at the end of the trailer. I remember when that trailer came out, I was so excited. It was such a good trailer. But back when this movie first came out, for some reason I thought that the Devil's Triangle was like a gigantic cave. because it feels like it's framed that way because the sky goes dark. The Monarch finally sails in, and the sky goes dark, and it makes it feel like they're sailing into a cave, but they're actually not. They're just sailing into the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Triangle. Like Captain Tom's, he looks down at his map and he sees the triangle on his map. It says uncharted waters. So I'm guessing this whole area is just clouded in fog, smoke. It's very dark. You can't see anything. So it makes it seem like it's a cave, but it's actually not. But one of the other officers, he sees that the pirate flag from the ship they were chasing in is in the water. So he's like, "Sir, there's something in the water." And the other officer's like, "Ship to starboard." And they see off on the right side this very decrepit old hull of a ship just sitting there. And one of the officers is like, "That's no ship, sir. It's a shipwreck." And then we get to see this very quick shot of a bunch of forms running through the water up to the Monarch. So we get to see the Silent Mary, of course, which is what this shipwreck is. It's not an actual shipwreck, but this is Captain Armando Salazar's ship, the Silent Mary, in its destroyed, gruesome form. And we see Salazar and his crew running on water, which they can do, apparently, up to the Monarch in kind of this fog. They can't see anything, so perfect stealth attack. But Captain Tom's is like, "No, she's sailing straight toward us." And then Captain Tom's gives the order to open fire, and all the people on deck, they begin preparing the guns. They begin firing the cannons off toward the Silent Mary, off on the starboard side. Henry looks out of the little window of his cell and sees the Silent Mary in front of him, which is slowly getting closer to the Monarch. And then we see the Silent Mary kind of comes out of the fog right in front, right on the starboard side of the Monarch. And Salazar's ghost pirate crew, not pirates, but his ghost crew, board the Monarch, and they begin massacring every single person on board. They just immediately just rip through everyone so easily. And like literally everyone just gets killed so fast. And one of these soldiers was carrying a lantern. He gets killed and he drops the lantern on the deck and it lights the deck on fire. One of the officers gets stabbed by, I believe it's Lieutenant Lazaro, by the shape of the hat behind him, but I can't really tell. But a whole battle, of course, breaks out, and then we see the captain of this ghost crew steps on deck, and he slowly walks with his sword and the scabbard kind of like using them as canes, which I think is really cool. He steps over this corpse of one of the redcoats, uses his sword, and takes that guy out. And we just get this really, really fantastic, menacing, like scary introduction to Captain Salazar and the rest of his crew, but specifically Salazar. And we see blood leaking through the deck when Henry looks up. Pretty terrifying, but at this point, everyone's pretty much dead. Some of the soldiers are holding Captain Tom's, and Salazar walks up over to Captain Tom's, and Captain Tom's is like, "What are you?" And Salazar grabs his neck and starts choking him. He lifts him up, and Salazar just says, "Death!" And then he breaks Captain Tom's neck and he throws him into the fire. And then we go back to Henry, who is seeing this blood drop down, and he gets scared and he falls back and knocks over a bucket and makes a bunch of noise. And Salazar hears this, and Salazar and his crew begin to make their way below deck to find out what the source of the noise was. So Henry just looks up and he slowly sees Salazar walking down the stairs with his crew behind him. And that old man in the cell next to Henry is scared for his life. he's just he won't shut up. And Salazar walks up to Henry's cell and he just morphs through it, kind of like how the Dutchman crew can morph through things as well. But Salazar, he picks up one of the Jack Sparrow wanted posters off the ground. And he looks at it. And he says, Jack Sparrow. And at this point, he's gotten very annoyed of the old man who is, whimpering and like, So he gives the order for one of his crew members to kill the guy. And one of them walks over, stabs the old man, and he falls back, and he is dead. So Salazar goes over to Henry, and he says, do you know this pirate? And Henry's like, only by name. And Salazar's like, you're looking for him? And Henry doesn't give an answer, but Salazar is like, is that a yes? And Henry just says, yes. And Salazar says, for too many years, the Triangle has cursed us, condemned us to this hell on earth. The key to our escape is Jack Sparrow and the compass which he holds. And that also brings up the next plot inconsistency, which we won't really touch on yet, but it is the source of Salazar's escape, and we'll talk about it when it actually happens. But interesting. But Henry is very scared of Salazar, but Salazar says, no need to fear me, boy. I always leave one man alive to tell the tale. Find Sparrow for me, and relay a message from Captain Salazar. Salazar. Tell him I will behold the daylight again, and that death, and on that day, death. And I love how when he says death, all like the black kind of like liquid comes out of his mouth. It's really disgusting. But he's like, death will come straight for him. Will you say that to him, please? And Henry's like, yes. And Salazar just says, I wish I could do it myself, but dead men tell no tales. And then, of course, we have the name drop of the movie, and we get the music blaring again as the camera zooms up from Henry's cell and overlooks the burning Monarch. And out on top of the Monarch, we get the big title drop, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. And after this scene ends, we go over to the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean, which is a new area that we have not been to in the Pirates of the Caribbean world yet, so it's cool to be here at St. Martin. And this priest begins talking, and he says, Karina Smith, you're an orphan, born of the devil, accused of practicing witchcraft. Before you die, do you have anything to confess? And this is where we are introduced to Kea Scodelario, who is playing Karina Smith, who is a very cool character. I know a lot of people give Karina a lot of flack. I personally really like Karina's character. We'll talk about it more when we kind of are more introduced to her. But Karina explains, she's like, I confess that I'm not a witch, that I'm a woman of science. I confess that I have survived on my own, with nothing but a diary from the father I never knew, and a quest for the truth of who I am. And we can see that she is actually picking this lock as she is talking, and she says, I confess that I will die before I give up the search. And I confess that while we've been talking, I've picked this lock. And she slams the door out and knocks the priest over, and she runs out of her cell. And the priest is just stunned on the ground. But Karina, I think, is a really cool character. I know she gets a lot of flack. She's no Elizabeth Swann, but that wasn't the point. You can't just. I feel like if you try to compare Karina to Elizabeth, it's just an unfair comparison, because Elizabeth Swann is one of the best female characters of all time. Like, I think that's easy to state, and I don't think anyone really have a problem with me saying that. Elizabeth Swann is definitely one of the most developed and one of the best female characters in any movie or just anything of all time. I mean, she's what can she not do? But anyway, we'll talk about Karina more when we get more exposed to her. But we go over to this dedication ceremony that is happening. This dedication ceremony that is happening in the center of the town of St. Martin. And we get Mayor Dix. Yes, that is actually his name. It's Dix. Mayor Dix. He begins and says, "Today we dedicate the Royal Bank of St. Martin, the most secure banking institution in the Caribbean." But we see Karina has escaped, and she's kind of peeking out and observing this happening right in front of her. But she knows that the soldiers are on her tail, so she has to find a way to escape and hide somewhere. But we see the people, they open the doors of the bank, and the whole crowd is assembled there, and they all like, ooh, ah, as they see the gigantic, one-of-its-kind safe that is housed inside the bank. And Mayor Dix continues, and he says, "Our new vault is 5 inches thick and weighs an imperial ton." And as Karina is making her way through the town, some soldiers find her. She's like, I've got her. So Karina tries to run away from these soldiers who are currently chasing her down. And the one guy is like, "Stop that witch." But Karina stops, and she tries to find out where she can escape to. But she sees a horse-drawn cart off in the distance, and she begins to run off toward that cart. And we go back over to the bank dedication ceremony, and Mayor Dix continues and says, "With this bank, the town of St. Martin enters the modern world." And one of the guys goes and begins to open up the safe. And so these soldiers who have lost Karina, they shamefully walk up to their officer, the person in charge, who is none other than John Scarfield. That is actually his name. It's never mentioned in the movie, but that is actually his name, in case you didn't know. John Scarfield. And I think he's a pretty cool character. He's pretty menacing, I think, in this movie. He doesn't really do too much, and he kind of... He ends up dying without really doing too much, but I think he's a kind of menacing guy. Is he at all one of the best Pirates villains? No, but I think he's kind of cool. But they go up to Scarfield, and they're like, "I'm sorry, sir, the witch escaped her chains." And Scarfield tells this officer, he's like, "Find that wicked lass, or you'll swing in her place." And then the soldiers is like, "Sir," and they walk off away from Scarfield. And we go back over to the bank dedication ceremony. And Mayor Dix is continuing his monologue and says, "No man nor army can ever rob the gold from St. Martin. Open the vault." And they open up the vault, and inside the vault, sleeping, is none other than Captain Jack Sparrow. Of course, played by Johnny Depp, because who else could play Captain Jack Sparrow? But Jack is drunkenly asleep inside the vault. How did he get into the vault? I have no idea. I have an inkling of an idea, but we'll get to that in a second. But we zoom in on Jack, who's asleep inside the vault, with all the gold and money surrounding him, as the crowd looks on. And one of the people in the crowd yells out, "Pirate!" And Jack's like, "Pirate." And then he opens his eyes and wakes up. He's like, "Pirate!" Ah! And he falls out of where he was laying and falls on out of the safe onto the ground of the bank. And he stands up with his bottle of rum in hand. And we can see that Jack has kind of undergone another transformation in this movie. Of course, he went through a transformation at the beginning of On Shooter Tides, because they kind of gave his outfit like a plussed up look. He had more stuff on, he had more belts, more things in his hair. He had the new charm to replace his piece of 8. But in this movie, Jack has so much more stuff on his person. It's honestly unbelievable. So, for one thing, he has 2 pistols now, which is interesting. He has like 3 belts on. Of course, he has his trademark jacket, and the rest of his normal outfit's still pretty much the same. But his hair is probably the most noticeable change in this film. His hair is way more blonde, or kind of like a light brown, like a dark blonde color in this film. In the other movies, it's more of a dark brown, almost like a black sometimes. But this movie, it's way lighter color. And not just that, his hair is also way longer. His hair, some of his dreads now go down to his waist, which is kind of weird. I'm not really the biggest fan of Jack having this super long hair. I think it kind of gets in the way, and it makes it seem there's just too much going on with Jack. There's too much going on his person. I don't know if this was a change that, Johnny had in mind or someone else had in mind when they were doing this new version of Jack, but I feel like the hair being so long, it just makes it feel like there's so much going on. And I'm not a fan of the really long dreads that he has. But Jack kind of regains his bearings, and he's like, this may seem a peculiar request, but could someone explain to me as to why I am here? And then we see behind, in the back of the bank, behind the vault, are these two large ropes that are tied to the back of the safe and are going out of the walls of the bank. And we see on the other side of those ropes, we see Martin Kleba is back as Marty. Of course, Marty was in Pirates 1, 2, and 3. He was not in Pirates 4, but he makes his return in Pirates 5. How did he survive the attack on the Black Pearl? I have no idea. Because, the last time we saw Marty, he was on the Black Pearl under Barbossa's command. Maybe he left the Black Pearl before the attack happened, and that's how he survived. But who knows? But Marty is still here, and he's back, and it's great to have him back. But Marty kind of shakes on the rope to try to hopefully get Jack's attention. But we see Marty walk over to Gibbs, of course, Kevin McNally back as Josh McGibbs, and we see the return of Scrum, played by Stephen Graham, of course, back from On Stranger Tides. And also interesting for Scrum, because at the end of On Stranger Tides, Scrum was on the Queen Anne's Revenge when Barbossa, took command. So I wonder if Scrum just left the Queen Anne's Revenge too and just joined up with Jack again. But it's good to see them all back together. And we can see at this point, Gibbs is looking very old. And it's interesting because this movie is only a year or two technically after On Stranger Tides. So maybe Gibbs just ages so rapidly in that short span of time, but he's way older. His hair is a lot grayer in this movie than it is in the other films. But of course, Gibbs pulls out a pocket watch to kind of take a look at the time. But of course, at this point, they know that there's a pirate in the bank, so a whole platoon of British soldiers come out and they begin to point their muskets at Jack, and Jack's like, no, wait, I just need it, just give me a moment to clear me head, and he takes a drink of rum, of course, and the soldiers begin to make ready to fire. They begin to point their muskets out at Jack, and out of the vault wakes up a woman who was in the vault with Jack. And one of the soldiers is like, hold your fire! There's a woman with him in the vault. And I love how when they say there's a woman with him in the vault, I love how Gibbs, Scrum, and Marty are just like, oh crap, and they begin to start getting ready. And we can see there's a whole bunch of horses that they've kind of reeled together. You can obviously there's the impression that they've been working on this scheme for a pretty good while. They have all these horses, this whole elaborate plan. But I love how Scrum helps Marty up on the horse. But Mayor Dix is like, never mind about that trollop. And one of the guys is like, sir, I believe that's your wife. And then everyone's all shocked. And the woman runs out, and Mayor Dix is like, Francis? And then he's so shocked that his wife was in there with Jack. So I'm guessing Jack got with the mayor's wife, and that's how he got into the vault, the Francis opened up the vault for him and they got inside. I'm guessing that's how he got in, but yeah, but Jack, he's still coming to, but he's like, right, I've got it. And he looks at the vault and all the money and the ropes in front of it. He's like, I've got it. I'm robbing the bank. And Mayor Dix yells out, shoot him. And Jack cowers down on the ground as the platoon of soldiers begins to open fire on him. And Gibbs and the rest of the crew begin to get the horses running, and the ropes that are attached to the horses, they begin to pull the safe all the way to the back of the vault. And a lot of the gold and money already comes out in that first initial shove, but the horses begin to pull their hardest to try to get that vault out of the bank. But what ends up happening, instead of the vault just breaking through the wall, the vault ends up pulling the entirety of the bank building with it. And I love how Gibbs turns around as they're pulling the whole entire building with them. He's like so like flabbergasted. But of course we get some great Pirates music, classic Pirates music, playing in the background as Jack turns around and he puts his hat on. It's a very iconic moment, honestly, for Jack Sparrow. But he turns around and says, that was not part of the plan. And a rope ties up around his foot, and he begins to get pulled along with the bank. And we get the return of the Jack Sparrow music theme, which we have not heard in a very long time. So very great to hear it here. I think it's very awesome they brought it back for this part. I love this little scene as the crew are pulling the bank. And we get this quick view of this blacksmith who's working in this dark alley. And I love how the bank completely covers all the light up. And the blacksmith just does not, like, it doesn't faze him at all. I think it's so funny. But the bank breaks through a bunch of these clotheslines that are up in the street here. And we get this cool scene of Jack, who he's taking a sip of rum as he's being trailed behind the bank, and he sees all the gold and all the coins are flying out of the bank. So he tries to grab some stuff off the ground as he's being slid with it, but of course all the people of St. Martin are going crazy for all the gold that's now just chilling in the street. Then we go back over to Karina, who hitched a ride on the back of that cart. Karina ends up making her way over to the Swift & Sons chart house, which is this place that she enters. Of course, we see this sign that says, no dogs, no women. But she walks inside, and of course we have behind her, we have that gigantic, great map with all the celestial stars and constellations, as well as the world map as well. And we can see on the top, we see a name that says G.W. Swift Esquire. And I'll bring it up here. There's actually a book that came out in 2017 to tie in with this movie that's called The Brightest Star in the North, The Adventures of Karina Smith. And it's actually a really good book. It actually details all of Karina's past and where she's been up until this point. So it covers her at the orphanage as a kid, and she eventually, we'll talk about this book on its own episode later on, but she eventually gets adopted by this lady named Lady Devonshire, who lost her husband, and Lady Devonshire and Karina end up, they bond over their love of the stars and astronomy, and they end up charting like 200 stars together, which is pretty cool. But she actually attends, the reason I bring up this whole thing is she actually attends in London a talk by one of the Swifts. I can't remember. It was a while since I've read this book. I don't know if it's actually the G.W. Swift guy here or if it's like his son or something, but she hears one of them talk at this like press conference at this college or something in London. But anyway, we'll talk about that book more in depth on its own episode, but it's a very cool book if you're interested in Karina's past. But she walks over to this gigantic telescope in the center of the shop, and the shopkeeper comes over. I don't know if this is actually like one of the Swifts too, or if it's just some guy working here. But he walks over and he sees Karina, and he's like shocked. And he says, "No woman's ever handled my Herschel." And then we go back over to the bank heist, which is happening. I love how Gibbs is trying to make everyone get out of the street, like clear a path. And Gibbs sees that they're getting too close to this building on the side of the road, and the bank just takes off this whole entire balcony of this blue building on the right side of the road, and all the debris comes crashing down, and Scrum's like, stop, stop, stop. But I love how, as Jack is just being trailed to the back of the bank, these two ladies kind of like flirt with him as he kind of like waves as he passes by. But Jack begins to climb up the front of the bank, making his way up, and Gibbs gives the order to hard to starboard, and they turn right, and the bank makes such a swift turn that the bank begins to keep sliding along, and it collides with a building, and Jack falls off and falls down the staircase. And I love he just falls down so comedically, and he just stands up like nothing happened. We go back over to Karina, and she's like, "Sir, your celestial fix was off. I've adjusted it 2 degrees north. Your map will no longer be imprecise, although you will have to start again with it." And the guy's like, "You're a witch!" And Karina's like, "No, I'm not. Am I a witch for having cataloged over 200 stars?" And the guy's like, "Witch!" And Karina sighs, and she's like, "There's a blood moon coming. I simply need to purchase a chronometer. I'll pay you double for selling to a woman." And we see behind her, this guy is readying a pistol, and he aims it at Karina, and he yells out, "Help!" And she turns around, and he's like, "There's a witch in my shop." And I love how Jack just walks through this street, and there's all of these soldiers that are chasing after the bank, and he just walks right past them all. And he ends up stumbling right into the building that Karina's in. So he just opens the door and walks in. And the guy's like, "And a pirate! There's a witch and a pirate in my shop." And Jack's like, "Well, it's your lucky day. Have either of the 4 of you seen my bank?" I was like, either of the 4 of you? Like, he's like seeing double because he's drunk. But out of nowhere, the bank smashes into the large telescope and completely topples it, destroys everything. And Jack's like, "Found it." And the guy just starts screaming as the telescope crumbles to the ground. Poor Mr. Swift, or whoever that guy is. I can't remember if it actually is him. I think in the book it does actually cover this part of the movie too. I think it actually is one of the Swifts, but I can't remember which one it is. Anyway, Jack is now running with Karina in tow. And Jack's like, "Were you part of the plan?" And Karina's like, "I'm not looking for trouble." And Jack's like, "What a horrible way to live." And behind them emerges John Scarfield and some other officers running behind them, chasing them. But Jack and Karina, they make their way up this ladder, up to this little loft. And one of the soldiers from below is like, "Stop that witch!" And Karina's like, "We're trapped. What do we do?" And Jack just grabs her and just says, "You need to scream." And he throws her off this balcony into a cart of hay below her. And the cart just takes off. The horses just take off. And Karina just looks up at Jack. She just yells, "You filthy pirate!" And Jack's like, "No need for name calling." And then Scarfield and the rest of the officers, they run back and they begin firing off at that cart. And they all miss somehow. Scarfield, not too happy about that. But the crew is still pulling the bank throughout the town. Jack sees his opportunity to finally make his way back over to the bank, hopefully catch a ride on it. He runs along the rooftops here, and he sees this flagpole. He jumps on the flagpole, and the flagpole bends. He falls right on the roof of the bank. We have "He's a Pirate" playing in the background here, which is fantastic, as Jack kind of surfs on the top of this bank. I love how Gibbs looks up, and he looks behind him, and he just sees Jack at the top of the bank, and he looks back, and he's like, "Wait, what?" And he looks back again, and he sees Jack just chilling up there. And he looks back, and he yells out, "Jack!" And Jack looks in front of him, and they see this bridge that is blocking their way. And Jack's like, "Bridge?" And I love how Marty just ducks down. And then we have this great slow-mo of Jack jumping off the roof of the bank, onto the top of the bridge as the whole bank building gets completely destroyed and demolished, and Jack jumps off the bridge and falls right on top of the safe as it breaks through the wall of the bank finally, and finally, the heist is complete, and they finally made out with what they originally intended to steal, which was just the safe. But I love how the roof and the rest of the bank just topples and completely just blocks off that bridge and everything, and blocks those soldiers from getting to Jack. But the heist is complete, and I really do love that scene. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really great opener for the movie. Yeah, I think it's great. Anyway, next scene is somehow, I don't know how, but they somehow got this Imperial ton weighing safe onto the deck of the ship. So we go over to the ship, which is the Dying Gull, and this is Jack's ship at the moment. I don't know if it's really his ship, because it's kind of just it's just a ship that's just chilling in this old abandoned harbor on St. Martin. But I don't know how they lifted this safe onto the deck of the ship. How'd they do that? And now that we've made our way to the Dying Gull, we are also introduced to the rest of Jack's new crew in this movie. So, of course, we're accompanied by Josh McGibbs and Marty and Scrum, but we also have 3 new pirates in this movie as well. So we have Kremble, who is played by Adam Brown, and he played one of the dwarfs in the Hobbit movies, and that's all I can see him from. So I just see him, I'm like, oh, that's the guy from the Hobbit movies. And in addition to Kremble, we also have Pike, who is played by Delroy Atkinson. He's the one who's standing off to the right side of Kremble. And then we have one other pirate here who is Bollard, and he's played by Danny Carrane. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he is the other pirate on deck here. So we have those 3 pirates in addition to Gibbs, Marty, and Scrum. But Jack opens the door of the safe, and there is nothing in it. So, of course, since the safe was open during the entire heist, all of the money came out. It all flew out, and there's nothing left. But one gold doubloon, which Jack grabs. And I love how Jack grabs it, and he just discreetly kind of tucks it into his jacket, so no one sees that it was in there. But Scrum walks over to the safe and he looks around, and I love how Jack's just kind of drumming his fingers on the safe. And then Scrum just sighs and he's like, oh, it's empty. Where's the Dush? And I love how Jack turns around. He's like, do you think that robbing a bank is easy? I don't know why I find that line so funny, but I think it's great. Do you think that robbing a bank is easy? But yeah, Jack's like, do you think that robbing a bank is easy? You gaggle of gutless heels of the wombs, guilty of putting me in this dreadful pickle in the first place. And I love how Jack's like, now line up and offer me a tribute. And then Marty's like, you want us to pay you? And then Jack's like, am I not the captain of this ship? And I love to get this shot of the Dying Gull just sitting at this abandoned harbor. And then Kremble's like, you call this a ship? And then Bollard's like, where's the treasure? And Pike's like, all of us are starving. And Bollard's like, we will no longer follow a captain without a ship. And then Jack's like, I have a ship. And he pulls out from his jacket the black pearl in the bottle, of course, that he got off of the Queen Anne's Revenge in On Stranger Tides. And he still has it, of course. And Jack says, the black pearl has never left me side. And Pike says, the pirate Barbossa rules these seas now. Has 10 ships, guns full. And Kremble's like, not to mention his cannonballs. 18 pounds each, they say. And I love how Jack's like, a one-legged man with 18-pound balls? That's why he walks funny. Oh my god, there's so many great jokes in this movie. But they all sigh and shake their heads, and Jack's like, oh, come, mates. Did we not find the treasure of Macedonia together? And Kremble's like, it was a troll of rotten wood. And Jack's like, go to King Midas. And then Scrump's like, pile of donkey dung. And Jack's like, duh. And then Gibbs is like, face it, Jack. Bad luck dogs you day and night. And Jack's like, well, that is a blatant fabrication. And then out of nowhere, a seagull poops on Jack's shoulder, emphasizing Gibbs's point. And Kremble says, you've lost your luck. And Bullard says, you've lost your ship. And Marty says, and now you've lost your crew. And Pike says, Jack Sparrow is no longer our captain. And Pike, Bullard, and Kremble, along with Marty and Scrum, they all dismount the Dying Gull, leaving Jack and Gibbs. And this moment, it is a sad moment, but this moment, it doesn't make sense to me. But Gibbs walks over to Jack, and Gibbs says, I'm sorry, Jack, but we've reached the end of the horizon. And Gibbs follows his comrades and leaves Jack alone. And I don't know, this is just, feels so out of character for Gibbs. Like, obviously at this point, Jack is now at his lowest point, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I don't think Gibbs would have ever left Jack. Like, you know, Gibbs was Jack's most loyal person. Like, Gibbs would never, like, leave Jack. It just feels out of character for Gibbs, but this leaves Jack in a very sad situation because he's alone now. He has no one there with him. And he kind of gets angry at this, and he yells out after all of them. And he's like, right then, you're dismissed. You're all dismissed, eh? All of you dismissed. You'll never sail with Captain Jack Sparrow again, tell you that. But yeah, Jack is at his lowest point now. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, because we have one quick scene that comes up here that is one of my favorite moments in Pirates of the Caribbean, and one of my favorite Jack Sparrow scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean. And this is such a beautiful scene coming up here. But Jack, he pulls out his compass now because he's unsure of what to do. And the compass points out to the sea in front of him. Of course, because Jack is longing to be out on the open ocean again. But we also see, as Jack walks to the stern of the Dying Gull, if you notice on the railing in front of the helm, there is this black fabric draped on the railing. And you can see like a bit of white and red on there as well. And that is actually, I believe it's actually Jack Sparrow's flag. Like the one that we see on the dinghy at the end of Outworld's End. It is actually Jack Sparrow's flag, which I think is really cool how it's just chilling on the ship here. I think it's really nice. Really cool detail. But Jack, he walks over to the stern of the Dying Gull and he pulls out the black pearl in a bottle. And I adore this little moment so much. But he rests the black pearl in the bottle on the railing on the back of the Dying Gull, and he looks out at the black pearl and he stares at it. And then we get this shot of Jack imagining the black pearl on the open ocean, because we get this great shot of the water level in the bottle is matching up with the water level of the ocean, and it's this really like poetic and beautiful shot. I don't know who thought of this, but this is a fantastic shot. But just, oh my god, like Jack imagining the black pearl out on the ocean again, just wanting to see it on the waves, wanting to see it on the ocean again. Like, it's a really, really heartfelt moment for Jack, and one of my favorite moments in this entire movie. But we'll end there, since we're already about 80 minutes in before I've edited this episode. Or about 25 minutes into the movie. It's a good place to stop right there before we meet back up with Henry Turner. But let's quickly describe Jack's situation here, because one of the main faults of this movie to a lot of people is that Jack Sparrow doesn't feel like Jack Sparrow. He feels like an imposter, Jack Sparrow. And here's my opinion personally on this issue. So maybe it doesn't come across as good as it could have. I feel like this movie could have been better in showing this, but we'll come to see next episode that Jack ends up reaching his lowest point probably maybe in his life, but at least his lowest point that we've seen. Because his whole crew has left him. He has no ship, pretty much. He has no money. He has nothing. He has literally nothing left. And he reaches his lowest point. And he ends up becoming a drunken pirate, with nothing to live for. And that kind of frames the opening of Jack Sparrow as a character in this movie. The whole first act of this movie, Jack Sparrow is completely drunk, completely just dazed and confused, I guess. But he's not acting like the Jack Sparrow we knew. But over the course of the movie, we see Jack Sparrow slowly begins to morph back into the Jack Sparrow we used to know. And I think it's a really cool arc for him in this movie. And I feel like this is what it was intended to show. It just doesn't really show it as good as it could have, because I feel like Disney at this point think that Jack Sparrow is just a comedic character, and they kind of want him framed that way. But when you really look at the movie, you look at it a bit closer, maybe it really only shows it like this to me. Maybe it shows itself like that to you too. But I think this movie is a really great story of Jack Sparrow reclaiming what he lost and becoming the Jack Sparrow we used to love. And I think it's a really great arc for Jack in this movie. But we'll cover, of course, that more in detail when we find out what Jack ends up doing on the next episode. So, I hope you have enjoyed the first part of our Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales / Salazar's Revenge episode. Here, I am very excited to be covering this movie. I really like this movie a lot. As I've said, I like this movie more than On Stranger Tides. That's a very unpopular opinion, I know. I know a lot of people don't like this movie. And I hope that even if you don't like this movie, I hope that you still are able to listen to these episodes and hopefully enjoy yourself along with me. Because I'm sure enjoying this. I mean, I'm always enjoying talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, but I am very happy and excited to begin covering this movie. So I hope if you are not the biggest fan of this movie, I hope you still listen to this episode and you find some enjoyment. You're able to have some fun, because at the end of the day, Pirates of the Caribbean is just plain fun. You look past all the dramatic elements, you look past all the insane story connections of the first 3 movies and everything. At the end of the day, this is just a franchise about a bunch of pirates doing pirate things. And it's just a lot of fun. So let's just have some fun on this podcast and have fun covering this movie. So I hope you join me again next time for part 2 of our Dead Men Tell No Tales watch along. And yeah, I'm very excited to be covering this movie. If you've left a review or a rating on this podcast at any time, any point in time, thank you so much for doing that. It really means a lot to me. And I'm really happy that we've made it so long. At this point, I've been doing the podcast for over a year at this point, which is really incredible. I celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the podcast on November 4th, because that was the day that the first episode of the podcast went live in 2022. So I never thought that I would get to this point. I never thought a year later I'd still be doing this. I thought I'd just be doing a few episodes and I would see, oh, nobody cares, and I would just stop doing it. But, somehow, people just found the podcast and started listening to it, and I'm very, very grateful for all those people who have listened and reviewed and wrote me messages and sent me messages and emails telling me how much you love this podcast. It really does mean the world to me. I want you to know that. Because I did not expect this podcast to make it to over a year. So thank you so much for listening. It really does mean a lot to me that you are listening and just enjoying Pirates of the Caribbean. Who knows what the future holds for this franchise, but at least we'll be here talking about Pirates of the Caribbean goodness. But thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time for our continuation of Dead Men Tell No Tales. Take care. I'll see you soon. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean or over on Twitter at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content, trivia over there. Make sure you check those platforms out. But be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon. And always remember, dead men tell no tales.